video is brought to you by Squarespace. Well friends, it's finally spring. I made it through another winter. Color and greenery has returned to the world, and so once again I have become envious of the trees. It has been a little while since I have plagiarized nature in order to use their untapped power for character designs, and it has been a while since I have made a character design video in general. I think the last one that I made was like last November? Yikes. The well has run dry a little bit, so today I'm gonna try to beat my character design art block and get those waters flowing again. And there really isn't anything like leaves returning to trees and flowers blooming everywhere I look to give me the dose of much needed serotonin I've been missing. And what better a character archetype to turn trees into than fairies? More specifically, fairy knights. I designed some of these from bugs a couple of years ago and it was a really fun time. And for some reason, I tend to really struggle with designing fairies in general. So I figured, why not give it another crack? See if I can improve a little bit. So after perusing the many beautiful trees that nature had to offer up for this video, the ones that stole my heart were the Antarctic Beach tree, the Chinese ginkgo tree, and the Japanese cherry tree. Because yes, I am a little basic, it's just pretty, and why not? So exploring my character boards a little bit that I've put together, in my main section here I have a bunch of general visual inspiration for things, mostly based around like different color theming and general shape language. Just a lot of fae, nature inspired, tree or plant inspired character designs in here, and also a bunch of different styles of feminine armor. Going into the individual boards, with the Antarctic Beach, a lot of the emphasis is placed on like the really cool root growth and a lot of the greenery growing on that. So that's going to be a really big theme with this character. Very overgrown aesthetic, maybe some like antler vibes going on in here, a lot of like organic shapes for the armor, and of course more of like a green theme for the character herself. For Chinese ginkgo, once again, I have lots of pictures of trees, but this one with more of an emphasis on the individual ginkgo leaves themselves because they have such a beautiful, interesting shape, and it reminded me a lot of some of the costuming from Dorne in Game of Thrones, so I have a couple of pictures of that in here. Various yellow dresses, things that kind of fit in that color palette range, some wing inspiration, some facial reference. This tree has a very like yellow emphasis going on, of course, but sometimes the leaves can get like a little decayed and have some like brownish reds going on, so I'm also trying to bring in some like maybe interesting red accents with makeup or some of the accessories here. And finally, for Japanese cherry, I want to lean all the way into this like soft, draping, almost waterfalling effect of the leaves on the cherry trees. And in line with that, I of course have references of long pink hair, which I'm going to try my best to not steer the direction of my own OC, Rose Thornblade. Pretty flowy dresses and things like that. Some ideas for how armor could fit into this particular design, and a lot of cool different headpieces and headdresses and things. I also have a lot of really cool weapon design inspiration in the main folder here because I want that to be sort of like an individual thing for each character. So now that I have some visual direction for these character designs, you guys know the drill. I usually like to start out my process with a little bit of rough character sketching and of course some thumbnails.
So normally whenever I first get into these character designs, I typically hit my sketchbook and just start doing a bunch of rough sketches of their faces and general thumbnails and just really rough ideas that I have in my head, mostly to just get out something even if it's not necessarily good. And this also helps a lot with iteration, but this week I admit I was feeling very rusty and art blocked and not super motivated, so this time I just kind of got right into the thumbnails. I didn't exactly have a personality or story direction with these characters, which is usually what helps me start out with like the more personal character sketching, but I did have some broad concepts and ideas, which is perfect for doing these like really vague colored thumbnails that can help me get a little bit closer to what I'm ultimately going for. I feel like the direction that I ended up going in with these felt very video game character model. I was really going for like high fantasy, maximalism, very stylized armor and overall clothing designs in general. I was also pulling from various bugs here for the wing designs because that's also something that I wanted to nail down early on. There's definitely some like beetle, moth, dragonfly inspiration going on here as well for those. And after a lot of vague sketching, I was able to come up with 3 concepts that I was happy enough with to go into design phase.
For as much as I love making characters, I sometimes do not keep track of them as well as I probably should, which is something I'm trying to change by cataloging more of them in the character profiles on my portfolio site, which is powered by this video sponsor, Squarespace. My favorite thing about Squarespace is the level of customization that I can get with their website website builder, Fluid Engine. You can make literally any kind of website page that you could possibly need, and you can do it quickly and easily with page templates to get you started, and their drag and drop system makes the actual building process simple and intuitive. And their entire website building process also works like this. To get started, you can choose a flexible website template that suits the general direction of your site and customize the site style to fit your branding. Keeping things updated is just as simple because I can add new pieces to my galleries with the click of a button, and automatic image scaling will keep them organized for me, which is great whenever I have multiple galleries to keep updated with new work. But Squarespace also has countless features that help you market your site and help you earn more, like offering extensive site analytics so you know what's keeping your visitors engaged, and a whole range of commerce tools like members-only areas where members can access exclusive content, ways for you to sell your services and expertise to your audience in an organized way, and an entire e-commerce platform where you can run your very own store right alongside your Squarespace site. So if you're in the market for a website or portfolio, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your site, head to squarespace.com/pricklyalpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much as always to Squarespace for sponsoring the channel. Now let's get back to it.
First up, we've got the Antarctic Beach tree, which probably was the most difficult design for me to figure out, just in terms of visual balance and the amount of stuff going on, because I had a lot of conflicting ideas going into this. But I was mainly really inspired by how the bases of the trees and the root systems looked. They just had such an interesting shape to them. They created some really cool looking structures, and they had so much like overgrowth and moss and plant life coming off of them. I absolutely love the way they look, and I mainly wanted to use them as inspiration for this character's overall aesthetic and armor. These trees also have pretty interesting looking leaves, but I didn't lean into that as much because it sort of clashed with the established aesthetic that I had in mind. So typically, since the roots are at the base of the tree, I would probably use this as the bottom of a dress or more of like a flared mermaid skirt look with a root looking appearance. But since these characters are fairies and I kind of want them in flying poses for the purposes of these designs, I decided that would look a little bit odd and it wouldn't really sell the whole silhouette effect. So instead, I tried to focus those intertwining root shapes on mostly some breastplate and leg armor, but also on a crown that resembles some cool horns or antlers. I also wanted this character to be the archer of the group, so I also wanted to design a bow for her that used those intertwining root shapes. Trying to articulate how I came to the shapes I used in the corset and leg armor is a little difficult. I was mainly just going for flow and for vibes, trying to continually use reference and get them as close to the roots of the Antarctic Beach as possible, while also trying to keep my own aesthetic somewhat unified and something that still kind of resembles armor. I definitely see this as being light armor, maybe made out of leather or something like that, kind of artfully constructed by the Fae in that way that people who are really skilled with leather can basically sculpt with it and make really intricate shapes. Underneath the armor, I of course didn't want her skin to be exposed, so I gave her kind of a green looking battle dress. I wanted it to flow down between her legs and kind of have the effect of the moss draping over the Antarctic Beach tree trunks, and I also gave her similar fringes of moss coming off her gloves, which of course are stylized to help her shoot arrows more effectively. For the horn pieces, I kind of wanted them to weave throughout her hair, almost looking like branches growing out of the trunk of a tree. I don't know if these would actually be horns that are permanently mounted to her head or more of just like a crown or a headpiece, but I thought that it looked really cool and made her look very ethereal and high fantasy. I also added a bunch of moss growing and draping off of the antlers, and this is a character that I also had a really difficult time settling on a hairstyle for. At first I was kind of gonna have it just pinned up into sort of a voluminous updo, but I ended up wanting to add a little bit more flow around her face, almost like branches growing out or like a canopy of leaves. So I ended up adding a couple of strands of bubble braids just to give it a little bit more of an ethereal, high fantasy hairstyle feel. And on that same ethereal note, I also gave her glowing green eyes, a glowing bow and arrow, and glowing wings, because since trees and leaves get their energy through photosynthesis, I wanted all of my fairies to have a connection with some kind of light and basically base their abilities on some kind of light magic. I think it would also be cool if the light magic gave their powers some kind of accelerated plant growth ability, so whenever this character shoots an arrow at something, whenever it hits, it begins growing leaves and vines super quickly, and they can even be used to like capture an enemy rather than actually like harm them or something like that. I was kind of going light and breezy in terms of story and world building with these characters because the point of this is kind of just to get me back into the groove of things and provide kind of a low pressure character design video in order to do that. But I think these girls would definitely fit into my established forest protectors pantheon that I have going on here. Similar to my moth witches and my bug knights and my other tree knights, character is tasked with protecting some kind of huge sacred enchanted forest, but I think these would mostly be focused on like detaining evildoers or capturing them in some way. I also didn't have too much time to think about personality here, but I think given this character's focus on roots as a motif in her design, she would be the most grounded one, the one that is the most connected with the will of the forest, and therefore more of like a leader in this group. She would also be more of a long-range character in combat, so better able to see the full picture and call the shots from the air. I haven't thought a ton more about personality beyond that, but as always, feel free to leave some fan fiction in the comments. Next up is the Chinese ginkgo tree, and like I said, for this one, I was mainly inspired by the specific shape of the leaves. They have this really beautiful fan shape to them, which is of course perfect for how I design characters, which of course also meant that I had the perfect opportunity to give a character some bladed weapon fans. For this character, I stuck pretty closely to the thumbnail that I did because I ended up being pretty happy with that, which like I said in the mood board section, some of the costuming from Dorne and Game of Thrones really connected in my mind with the ginkgo leaf. I just thought the cut and the general silhouette of some of those dresses fit perfectly with what I was trying to do here. So I took a heavy inspiration from one of those dresses for this character's costume, but of course gave it a lot of my own twist. This character uses weapon fans and she's going to be doing a lot of melee and just generally going to be closer in with opponents she's fighting. I wanted to give her much more minimal armor compared to the others so it doesn't slow her down or weigh her down too much. I imagine her fight style would be mostly focused on speed and agility. Whenever I see pictures of ginkgo leaves, they're almost always falling from a tree in some kind of like mad spiral to the ground, being blown around by the wind. Just generally having an unpredictable flight path, which is very much how I see this character operating. So in addition to her little off-the-shoulder yellow ginkgo leaf jumpsuit, I also gave her some light leather armor around the neck and clavicle area, a corset for a little bit of support around the vital organs, and also some full coverage leather boots. I went pretty light on the armor everywhere else, mostly for aesthetic reasons admittedly, but I also wanted her arms to have plenty of dexterity to be able to use her fans really quickly. And this also plays a little bit into how I think her ability works, but I'll get back to that in just a minute here. For even more ginkgo leaf inspiration in her design, I gave her giant ginkgo leaf shaped fairy wings. I wanted to keep them pretty minimal to not take away from the rest of her design, so I gave them kind of like a butterfly wing texture and shape, having the top and bottom sets, and also having a frame inspired by the branches of a ginkgo tree. Her weapon fans themselves are also pretty straightforwardly inspired by a ginkgo leaf since they already have that existing fan shape, but I also tried to bring more inspiration from the branches and the tree shape itself into the design by giving them a little bit of a vining branch motif on the fans themselves. I also repeated this motif all over the costume with some embroidery on the jumpsuit and similar motifs all over her leather armor. I also carried this design into a little headpiece for her, also featuring those branches and ginkgo leaves. Getting back to how I think this character's abilities work, once again, this character uses light magic in a similar way that the Antarctic Beach character does, but this time with a little bit more focus on confinement through slicing, quick movements, and even the wind itself. Like I said, I think this character would be really fast and agile, very pointed and effective with her attacks, and I think it would also be cool if she was aided by thousands of tiny ginkgo leaves flying in the wind behind her blades, going so fast that they basically act as secondary slicing attacks. And I think it would also be cool if her speed was so fast that she could basically create little tornadoes of ginkgo leaves, confining and slicing up her opponents, and that's basically her method of capture and confinement. Of course, this could also be used to absolutely eviscerate an enemy, but she usually doesn't do that. I think her personality would be similar to her speed, a quick wit, a precise, straightforward kind of attitude, and I think she would even have a little bit of a sarcasm and quippiness to her. And finally, we have the Japanese cherry tree, which here I'm kind of taking equal inspiration from both the cherry blossoms and the branches themselves because I think they both have really interesting shapes to them. So for this design, I was also pretty happy with the thumbnail that I came up with, so I mostly went into this design going for the same similar vibe that I got with that, but I was wanting to amend the design of some of the armor a little bit. I was mostly feeling that the armor direction that I was going in for the thumbnail was just like a little bit sharp and it didn't lean onto the shapes of the cherry blossoms themselves quite as much. So in this version, I definitely decided to go for more rounded petal-shaped armor. I just feel that it fit what I was going for a little bit more. And I think it also fit the kind of lighthearted energy that I wanted this character to have. So of course, the biggest component for this design, like I mentioned in the inspo board section, would be the mass of flowing pink curly hair. I wanted this to really emulate all of the blossoms waterfalling off of the cherry trees. They do kind of just look like a cascade of curly hair flowing down sometimes, so that's something that I tried to capture here. But I also wanted to have a little bit more of a structure to the hairstyle, a little bit more of a fantasy edge to it. So I did put the 2 strands in the front into long thick braids and the back of the hair into a big thick bun on her head to create a little bit more volume in the hair and also create more space for the crown that I'm going to add later on. And I also gave her some fluffy bangs to add to the softness of the whole hairstyle overall. And yes, I do realize that that's kind of ultimately the only thing that separates this hairstyle from Rose Thornblade, but she's gonna look different enough by the end of this, I promise. I just have a type. We all have a type. We have to accept it and just move on. Since I did it with the 2 previous characters, I also wanted to give this character sort of a crown or a headdress inspired by the branches of a cherry tree and also have little blossoms flowering and cascading off of that. And like I said, for the armor itself, I did end up making a lot of changes. I ended up bringing the flower shape of a cherry tree into a lot of the shapes of the plate armor. I chose to really highlight the cherry blossom shape in the pauldrons and the knee plates, and then based a lot of the other plate armor in just interconnected blooming petal shapes. This is always a really organic process for me, but the bases of the shapes for this plate armor are based in like actual armor shapes for the most part, and then the segments are broken up to look a little bit more like flower petals. This also departs from the thumbnail in that I just kept it green for the most part in the thumbnail iteration, but here I decided to add a little bit more magenta and pink into the armor, kind of highlighting the colors from the center of a cherry blossom, sort of fading out into that lighter pink tone. And I also gave the armor some pink borders on a couple of the plates to make the design a little bit more intricate. While I didn't keep the sharpness of some of the branches and roots of the cherry tree in the design of the armor itself, I did carry some of that sharpness and branching shape into the design of her weapon, which I decided for her would be an axe. Now hear me out. Whenever you think cherry blossom, you might not immediately connect it to a giant battle axe, but I wanted this character to end up being the tank of a group because normally I would think of a cherry tree as being more of like a delicate, soft, precise character, maybe fighting with a light sword or a rapier or something like that. But looking at some actual photos of cherry blossom trees, there's like a heaviness and weighted flow to the blooms on all of the branches. I've said several times already that it looks like water flowing or something like that. So given how I've decided that I want the other 2 characters in this group to fight, I wanted this character to be the tank of the group and fight with an overwhelming barrage of cherry blossoms, just a wave coming in and drowning her opponents, which also has a lot of comedic value for me because of how many anime characters do the stupid petal thing where there's just flowers absolutely everywhere after they leave the room. I've seen memes about it. I think it is so funny. So I thought, why not take that to a ridiculous extreme where she just summons like millions of flower petals out of nowhere and just basically swallows her opponents up in a tsunami. And that is also her method of detainment and capture, because good luck getting out of that. In terms of personality for this character, as the resident tank strong woman, I think she should definitely fall into like Herbo territory, but with this kind of soft, sweet, demure edge when she's not in battle, that is. I think it would be really funny if this character just absolutely rages in battle and obliterates everyone, but at the same time she is almost like unaware of her own strength, and after battle she's like, uh-oh, whoopsie, did I do that? And then there's just anime flower petals absolutely everywhere. I imagine she summons the flower petals by slashing with her axe and also maybe like flapping her wings really hard or something like that. So I also gave her prominent cherry blossom motifs on her axe, complete with like branching shapes that covered the blade and also wrapped down around the handle. And I also gave her a bunch of cherry blossoms cascading off of her sharp green tree-like wings. And with that, here are all of the finished designs of my new little group of fairy knights. I hope that you guys enjoyed how these came out. I definitely did, despite definitely also struggling with these designs because I am still very much rusty. I know this was a bit of a lighter character design video on like the personality, storytelling, lore end, but I kind of just wanted something that was a little bit more low effort, low pressure to ease myself back into making these videos because I really miss making them. I really love making these, but they also take a tremendous amount of like thought and work behind the scenes, and whenever you've made as many of these character design videos as I have, you do tend to run out of ideas and burn out occasionally. But I do want to get back into the swing of things because I do have some fun ideas brewing for other character design videos along these lines. So I think this was a fun group to start out with, and of course, as I always say, since I didn't come up with as much lore storytelling, you guys feel free to do that in the comments, come up with all the fan fiction, maybe give these girls some names because I also neglected to do that in this video. I couldn't really think up anything that felt fitting for all of them, so would love to see that in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching till the end of this video if you did. If you have other ideas for similar character design videos that you would like to see, also leave those suggestions down in the comments. But of course, as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers. Mushroom Sita, Ghastly, Galaxy Stardust 035, Lexibar, My Name is A, Miss Fenris, Becca, Niloid Nom, Cyrus Orion, Jenny Krasma, I Do TKD, Ren, Band Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Velly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Shihi Beyond My GBs Till I Ah, Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Christina Cantillo Art, Lunira, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, Meow 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 Meow, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Mix, Ice Cavan, A Wendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Brian, Phoenix, PNG Not Found, Freedom and Gus Gus, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.